My dad said your brother has kids. He needs your house more than you do after I worked 60-hour weeks for years to buy it. So I exposed the fraud they committed in my name, took them to court, and watched my own parents end up in prison. Growing up, my brother Isaac, 31 male, was always the golden child. I'm not talking about minor favoritism. I'm talking full-on, this kid can do no wrong treatment. It was ridiculous. My parents' mom, 56 female, dad, 59 male, would bend over backwards to make his life easier while I had to work for everything. When Isaac flunked out of college, no biggie. Mom and dad just paid for him to go to another school. When he totaled his car driving like an idiot, they bought him a new one the next freaking week. Meanwhile, I had to get straight A's just to get a half-hearted good job from them. If I got a B, it was like I committed a crime. The double standard was so obvious that even our extended family would comment on it at holidays, which only made my parents defensive and somehow blame me for causing drama. Classic. After college, which I paid for with scholarships and loans by the way, Isaac married Nora, 30 female, his high school sweetheart. She's cut from the same cloth as him, expects everything handed to her on a silver platter, and loses her mind when things don't go exactly her way. They're actually perfect for each other in that sense. They have 2 kids now, and don't get me wrong, my niece and nephew are cool kids, but they became the ultimate excuse for my parents to keep pouring resources into Isaac's life. They need it for the Garyon kids became the default response whenever I pointed out the inequality. The peak of their entitlement came when they bought this massive house in one of those cookie-cutter subdivisions. Way too big, way too expensive, and way beyond what they could actually afford. They were literally one missed paycheck away from complete financial disaster. But of course it was all for show, because Isaac and Nora have always cared more about appearances than financial stability. Meanwhile, I was living in a crappy apartment with 2 roommates, saving every penny I could. I worked this soul-crushing finance job that paid decent, but had me working 60-plus hours a week. I'd come home completely drained, eat some cheap ramen, and pass out just to do it all over again the next day. For 3 solid years, I lived like a hermit, skipped going out with friends, didn't date much, drove the same beat-up Toyota I'd had since college, and basically denied myself any small luxury. My coworkers thought I was weird because I'd bring the same peanut butter sandwich for lunch every day, instead of ordering takeout like everyone else. But I had a goal. I wanted to buy my own place. Not rent-own, and not just any place, but something decent in a neighborhood where I wouldn't have to worry about my car getting broken into every other week. When I hit my savings goal after those 3 brutal years, I started house hunting. I found this modest 3-bedroom house with a decent backyard in an okay neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just solid construction in a quiet area with good schools nearby. Not that I have kids, but good for resale value. The previous owners had maintained it well, and it only needed minor cosmetic updates. During the whole process, my parents never offered to help. Not 1 cent never offered to co-sign. Even though my credit was decent but not amazing. They didn't even come to look at potential houses with me. When I asked, Dad just said houses are a money pit, and went back to watching TV. When I finally closed on the place 3 years ago, I was so freaking proud of myself. Like I actually did this huge thing completely on my own. I invited my family over for a small housewarming party, thinking maybe they'd finally acknowledge my achievement. Instead, Dad walked in, immediately pointed out a small crack in the drywall by the door, and asked if I'd had the foundation checked. Mom didn't even say congratulations before asking when the guest room would be ready for them to visit. And Isaac, he looked around and said, "It's cozy," in that tone that clearly meant small. But whatever the place was, mine, and I was happy with it. I spent weekends fixing things up, painting rooms, learning how to replace a garbage disposal from YouTube videos. I built a small deck in the backyard by myself last summer. The house became my project, my sanctuary. Meanwhile, Isaac and Nora were struggling with their mortgage but kept up appearances. They'd host these lavish barbecues and buy new furniture they couldn't afford. My parents would bail them out whenever things got tight, pay their car insurance for a few months, or loan them money that never got repaid. I'd go over for family dinners and listen to them all talk about Isaac's job prospects or the kids' activities while nobody bothered to ask about my promotion or the kitchen renovation I just finished. Classic family dynamic that never changed. So that's where things stood until a couple of months ago. Me and my modest house that I worked my ass off for, and Isaac living beyond his means with my parents' constant support. Then Isaac lost his job. He was working as a sales manager, making decent money, but not enough for their lifestyle. According to him, the company was restructuring and his whole department got cut. According to a buddy of mine who works there too. Isaac had been on thin ice for months because of missed targets and showing up late. Either way, suddenly he couldn't make their mortgage payments. They missed 1 month, then another. My parents helped for a bit, but it became clear that even they couldn't keep up with Isaac's massive house payment, plus all their other bills. After missing 3 months of payments, foreclosure was looking inevitable. Isaac and Nora were freaking out, but still wouldn't consider downsizing or selling before things got worse. They kept expecting some miracle to save them from their own poor decisions. And that's when my parents cooked up their plan, where things went from typical family BS to absolute insanity. About 2 months back, my parents called and invited me over for dinner on a Tuesday night. We do family dinners every few weeks, usually when Mom decides she hasn't criticized my life choices in person for too long. I figured it would be the usual routine. When I got there, something felt off right away. Mom had made my favorite meal, which she only does when she wants something. Dad was being weirdly nice, asking about my work instead of just nodding along. Isaac and Nora finally showed up looking stressed but trying to hide it. We'd barely started eating when Dad cleared his throat, then dropped this. He said, "Since Isaac has kids and I don't, I should give him my house because it makes sense." I literally stopped chewing like food, just sitting in my mouth as I tried to process what the actual hell I just heard. My mom gave me that smile. If you have a manipulative mom, you know the one. You can always get another house, sweetheart. You're young and don't have a family to worry about. Think of the kids. You want me to just give them my house? Dad shrugged like he was asking me to loan Isaac $5. Not if we could figure something out, but they need a stable place. And since you're alone, it would be the right thing to do. My brain was seriously short-circuiting at this point. I looked over at Isaac and Nora, who were staring at their plates, not making eye contact. They'd clearly been in on this whole plan. I stared at my parents, trying to understand how we got here. These people raised me, and they were sitting there with straight faces, asking me to hand over my house, the thing I'd sacrificed years of my life for, to my brother, who'd never worked for anything in his life. I just said no. Simple as that. The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Mom's smile vanished. Dad's expression hardened. Isaac and Nora exchanged this look that was part panic, part anger. My mom took a sip of her water, then calmly said they'd take it another way. Then I felt this chill run down my spine. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Dad waved his hand dismissively. Forget it. Just think about it. I left soon after, feeling like I'd just been threatened by my own parents. When I got home, I double-checked that all my important documents were in my fireproof safe, not at my parents' house. I had this paranoid feeling they might try something which seemed crazy at the time. Turns out my paranoia wasn't nearly paranoid enough. I texted my buddy Ian, who's always been my sounding board for family stuff, sent him a quick rundown of what happened, and asked if I was going crazy. His response, "Dude, your family is nuts. Change your locks." I laughed it off as him being dramatic, but then I started thinking about my mom's weird threat. What did she mean by take it another way? It sounded vaguely ominous, but I figured it was just typical manipulation tactics. 1 week after that creepy dinner, I dragged myself to work looking like absolute garbage. Hadn't slept well the night before. My coworker Ryan took one look at me and just slid his coffee across the desk without saying a word. True bro move. I was trying to focus on this spreadsheet I'd been working on when my phone rang around 10 o'clock in the morning. Saw it was my bank calling, which was weird since they never call unless something's up. I picked up, and this woman introduced herself as Melissa from the mortgage department. She asked if she could confirm some details regarding my mortgage refinance application. I sat up straight in my chair. My what? She explained they'd received a request that morning to refinance my mortgage. The request was submitted under my name, but there were some inconsistencies in the documentation that flagged their security system. I told her flat out that I never submitted any refinance application, not even close. I was perfectly happy with my current mortgage. Then she said, "Well, someone did." My stomach dropped. I immediately asked her to put a hold on everything. Don't process anything. Don't approve anything. She said she would freeze the application pending investigation. I told my boss I had a family emergency and bolted from the office, drove straight to the bank. When I got there, I asked to speak with someone from the mortgage department about potential fraud. A loan officer pulled up the paperwork on his computer. When he turned the screen toward me, I literally felt sick. There it was, a complete mortgage refinance application in my name. All my personal info was there. Social security number, birth date, income details. But the punch, the new mortgage would be in both my name and my parents' names as co-owners. They had tried to forge my signature. They had used old documents of mine, stuff I'd left at their house years ago after college, as templates to fill out the application. The loan officer pointed out where the system flagged the application mismatched signatures and a wrong email. If the bank security hadn't caught these issues and called to verify, my parents might have actually pulled it off, taking over my mortgage and essentially stealing my house. I was beyond furious. I asked for printed copies of all fraudulent documents and had them note in their system that I hadn't authorized any of this. Right there in the bank, I called my mom on speaker so the loan officer could witness it. When she answered, I got straight to the point. You tried to steal my house. There was this brief pause, and then get this. She didn't even deny it. She just said, "Oh, don't be so dramatic. Dramatic. You committed fraud. That's illegal. Like, go to jail illegal. Oh, relax. We were just trying to help. If you had agreed in the first place, this wouldn't have been necessary. I'm reporting this." Her voice turned cold. "You wouldn't do that to your own family. Watch me." I hung up and turned to the loan officer. "Who do I talk to about pressing charges?" He directed me to the bank's fraud department. They explained I would need to file a police report and potentially get a lawyer involved. Walking out of the bank, I called my buddy Ian again, told him what happened, and he went from, "Your family is nuts" to "Holy dude. Lawyer up now." He recommended his cousin who's an attorney. I was still trying to process everything on the drive home. My phone blew up with texts and calls from my dad. Then Isaac started calling too. I turned my phone off completely. When I got home, I called in sick to work the next day and met with Ian's cousin, this lawyer named Derek. I showed him the forged documents from the bank, then gave him everything, the fake paperwork, the bank's records, even a statement from the loan officer who flagged the fraud. That night, my phone blew up. Mom, Dad, Isaac. I ignored them until Dad called for the third time. "What the hell are you doing?" he barked. "What am I doing?" "You tried to steal my house. That's a strong word. It's the right word. Fraud is also a good word. Identity theft works too. Listen, this doesn't have to go any further. You can drop all this legal nonsense and we'll forget it ever happened. You're overreacting. We're family. Family helps each other. Family doesn't commit fraud." He went quiet for a moment. Then his tone turned threatening. "If you take this to court, don't expect us to stand by you. You'll be cutting ties with this family forever." "I think you already did that when you tried to steal from me," I said, and hung up. I thought that was the end of it, that they'd realize they'd messed up and back off, maybe even apologize. Yeah, right. The next morning, I woke up to find my house had been egged, and not just a few splatters, my entire front door, garage, and even my car were covered in yolk and shells. I checked my security cameras, and sure enough, there were Isaac and Nora laughing their asses off while my mom stood beside them watching. I called the police and filed a report. The officers were sympathetic, but said there wasn't much they could do beyond a vandalism charge. And then, not even 2 hours later, the power in my house went out. I checked the breakers, but nothing was tripped. When I went outside, I saw the lock on my electrical panel had been cut and the main switch flipped off. The electric company confirmed someone had tampered with it, and I knew exactly who. By morning, the eggs had dried in the heat and were practically cemented to the paint. I spent 2 hours trying to clean it off before giving up and calling a mobile detailing service. Cost me $200. Then I called Derek again and told him everything. Sent him all the security footage. He advised me to get a restraining order. I drove straight to his office with all my evidence. He reviewed everything and started preparing the paperwork right away. I spent that night at Ian's place just to have a break from constantly looking over my shoulder at my own home. So after spending the night at Ian's place, I drove back to my house the next morning, half expecting to find it burned to the ground based on how things were escalating. What I found instead was a stack of papers shoved under my front door. Looked like they'd been pushed through the mail slot sometime overnight. At first glance, I thought it was some kind of legal threat from my parents, but as I flipped through them, I realized it was something else entirely. It was medical records specifically, psychiatric evaluations for me from when I was a teenager. When I was 16, I went through a rough patch, got caught with weed at school grades, dropped the usual teenage rebellion stuff. Nothing major by normal standards, but my parents acted like I was on the fast track to prison. They forced me to see this psychiatrist who basically rubber-stamped whatever diagnosis my parents wanted. The papers showed a diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder, which, if you know anything about psychiatric diagnosis, are basically fancy terms for difficult teenager who doesn't obey authority. The evaluation contained a bunch of exaggerated statements about my behavior that I'm pretty sure came straight from my parents. There was a note attached in my mom's handwriting. "Remember who you really are. Drop this nonsense or we'll show everyone, including your work." So now they were threatening to try to ruin my reputation and possibly my career by sharing outdated medical records from when I was a minor. Cool. Great parenting. That evening, Derek called me. "You need to come again. It's important." My mind went through a million thoughts. I was already exhausted with all this nonsense. But wait, Derek was waiting for me with a special kind of bomb. He slid a folder across the desk. We pulled a background check on your parents. Standard procedure since we're pursuing legal action. I flipped open the folder and my heart stopped. Inside was a criminal record. What the hell is this? I asked, trying to make sense. Derek explained that my parents had done this before. My dad was arrested in the 9S for tax fraud, and my mom, she was caught using someone else's identity to open credit cards. I stared at him speechless. My whole life I had seen my parents as strict, controlling, and unfair, but this was completely new information. It was years ago, he continued. They got off with fines and probation, but given what they just tried to pull with your mortgage, that's a pattern. The ground felt like it had been ripped out from under me. My parents were actual scammers with criminal records, and they were trying to pull the biggest con of their lives on their own son. What a twist. I kept flipping through the documents. It wasn't just one incident for each of them. Dad had multiple tax issues, including a case where he claimed business expenses for a company that didn't exist. Mom had 3 separate incidents of identity theft, all from people in her social circle. How did I never know about this? Most of these cases were settled quietly, he explained, and they happened when you were quite young. The most recent was 15 years ago, which would have been when I was 17, right around when they were pushing me to apply to colleges. Suddenly, their insistence that I only apply to local schools made more sense. They probably couldn't leave the state due to probation terms. What does this mean for our case, I asked. It means we have evidence that this behavior is part of a pattern, not a one-time lapse in judgment. It strengthens our position significantly. He tapped the psychiatric records I'd brought in. And this is clear witness intimidation. We can add that to the charges. My entire childhood was flashing before my eyes. But with this new context, there's more. Derek said, interrupting my thoughts. We've received responses to our subpoenas for their financial records. He pulled out another folder. Your parents are drowning in debt. They've taken out multiple high-interest loans over the last few years. They've maxed out credit cards, taken second and third mortgages on their house, and even borrowed against their life insurance policies. How much are we talking about? At least $300,000, perhaps more. Some of these loans appear to be from, let's call them, non-traditional lenders. But they always seemed. Financial criminals are often very good at maintaining appearances. Derek said, it's part of the con. I slumped back in my chair, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. My entire family history was a lie. The parents who had lectured me endlessly about responsibility and honesty were frauds in the most literal sense. Just when I thought it wouldn't get worse, Derek continued. There's one more thing you should know. We found some irregularities that suggest they may have used your identity for more than just this recent mortgage attempt. And that's when I found out there's a loan from 6 years ago that has my name on it. But the address listed is my parents' house. It's possible they've been using my identity for years. 6 years ago, I was fresh out of college, living in a crappy apartment with roommates working entry-level jobs. I was broke as hell, but determined to make it on my own. Meanwhile, my parents were apparently taking out loans in my name. Can we confirm this? Derek nodded. I've already requested the documentation from the bank. Should have it in a day or two. I felt sick. If they'd been using my identity for years, who knows what else was out there in my name? Credit cards, other loans, tax liabilities? Derek laid out a plan. First, freeze my credit immediately to prevent any new accounts from being opened. Second, get a complete credit report to identify anything suspicious. Third, file a police report specifically about the identity theft allegations. Fourth, continue with our restraining order based on the escalating harassment. I did everything. By evening, I was mentally exhausted, but had taken the first steps to protect myself. When I got home, I found Ian sitting in his car in front of my house. He'd been worried when I didn't answer texts all day and came to check on me. I invited him in and gave him the short version of what I'd learned. His reaction was exactly what I needed in that moment, just a simple damn. Then he ordered pizza and we watched movies until midnight, not talking about my family at all. And that night, I got a text from my brother Isaac. We need to talk. Meet me at Denny's on Main. It's about Mom and Dad. Suspicious, but what could get worse? When I pulled into the Denny's parking lot, Isaac's Subaru was there. Denny's was almost empty at 10 at night on a Tuesday. He was sitting in a corner booth looking rough. What's this about? I asked. Because if you're here to convince me to drop the charges or give up my house, you're wasting both our time. It's not that, he said quietly. Well, not exactly. I didn't know they actually went through with it, he said, with using your name for loans. They talked about it years ago, said they needed to leverage all available resources or some BS like that. I thought it was just talk. My stomach turned. So you knew? Not for sure, he said defensively. They mentioned it once or twice. I told them it was a bad idea. When I called him out on it, he tried to defend himself, saying he didn't take any money from me personally. I reminded him that he still had no problem trying to take my house. That's when things got interesting. Isaac looked genuinely scared as he explained how deep our parents were in trouble. Turns out the debts my lawyer found were just the tip of the iceberg. According to Isaac, our parents owed over $100,000 to loan sharks. One even mentioned, knowing where Isaac's kids went to school, the whole house scheme suddenly made more sense. They weren't just trying to help Isaac or be controlling jerks. They were desperate for collateral to pay off dangerous people. Didn't make it right, but explained the extreme measures. Then Isaac dropped the real shocker. Our parents had also taken out loans in his kids' names, his actual toddlers. They'd use their social security numbers to create credit accounts and take out loans worth thousands of dollars. The kids would probably discover the mess when they turned 18 and tried to get student loans or credit cards. When I asked how he found out, Isaac explained he'd stumbled across a folder of identity documents while looking for birth certificates last week. The folder had everyone's information, mine, his, the kids, even some extended family. I asked about the vandalism and property damage, and Isaac actually looked ashamed. He admitted it was a stupid plan from our mom. He acknowledged he shouldn't have gone along with it. When I suggested more normal solutions like selling their house or declaring bankruptcy, Isaac explained their house already had 3 mortgages and was underwater by at least $200,000, and bankruptcy wouldn't solve the loan shark problem. Anyway, the whole thing was so much worse than I had imagined. When I asked why Isaac was telling me all this now, he finally got to the point. He wanted my help not for our parents, but for his kids. He needed to figure out how to fix their credit and clear these fraudulent loans without getting Nora involved. If she found out what happened, she'd almost certainly leave him and take the kids. Part of me wanted to tell him to figure it out himself. He'd made his choices. But those kids were innocent. They were my niece and nephew, and they didn't ask to be born into this mess. I told him I'd think about helping with the kids' situation, but made it clear I wasn't dropping the charges against our parents or giving up my house. He seemed to accept that was fair. Before I left, Isaac warned me that our parents were planning something else. He didn't know details. Just overheard our mom on the phone talking about one last option if everything else failed. Great. Just what I needed to hear. On the drive home, I called Derek as soon as I got home and filled him in on everything. He advised me to document the conversation while it was fresh and to be extra vigilant about security. That night, I decided I would help my niece and nephew regardless of my feelings toward their parents. They deserved a clean start. But first, I needed to deal with the immediate threat, whatever my parents were planning next, and that plan revealed itself the very next day, leading to the final confrontation that broke everything apart. After that meeting with Isaac, I was on high alert. His warning about my parents planning one last option had me jumpy as hell. I installed a Ring doorbell the next day and added motion sensor lights around the house. Probably looked like I was preparing for a zombie apocalypse, but better safe than sorry. I spent the next 2 days working from home. Nothing happened. No suspicious cars, no attempts to contact me, nothing. The quiet was almost worse than the harassment. Then on the 3rd day, I got an email from Derek. He'd received the documents from that loan taken out in my name 6 years ago. The evidence was damning. My forged signature, my social security number, all the loan proceeds deposited directly into my parents' account. They hadn't even tried to be subtle about it. What really got me, though, was seeing my mom listed as the cosigner. She had walked into a bank pretending to be helping her son get a loan, knowing full well she was committing fraud. Derek advised me that we now had enough evidence to move forward with formal charges of identity theft and fraud. He'd prepared all the paperwork and just needed my final approval to file everything with the police and DA. This was the point of no return. If I gave the go-ahead, my parents would almost certainly go to jail. Despite everything they'd done, that was still a heavy thing to think about. But then I thought about my niece and nephew, just toddlers with credit scores already being destroyed by their own grandparents. I thought about the 6 years of lies, the attempt to steal my house, the harassment. Do it, I replied. Around 8 o'clock in the evening, just as it was getting dark, I heard a car pull into my driveway. I checked the security camera feed on my phone and saw my parents' Lexus. My heart started pounding. I texted Derek. They're here recording everything. Then I activated the audio recording app on my phone and put it in my pocket. I opened the door. You're really going to do this over a misunderstanding? Mom snapped. Misunderstanding. You stole my identity. Dad stepped forward, jabbing his finger at me. Lower your voice. We're still your parents. How could you? You little parents don't steal from their kids, I shot back. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us, by trying to put us in jail. Do you even realize how heartless you've become? You gave me nothing except trust issues and therapy bills. Mom's face went red. Dad lunged at me right on cue. The doorbell rang. Police and a detective from Financial Crimes arranged by Derek for a welfare check at exactly 8:30 in the evening. Mom switched to innocent mode, but the detective wasn't buying it. Dad actually tried to bolt out the back door. They were both cuffed and read their rights as they were led out. Mom made one last desperate plea. You wouldn't do this to your own mother. You did it to yourself. I watched them get taken away. After they were gone, I sat down on my front steps, suddenly exhausted. It was over, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt empty. My phone buzzed. A text from Isaac. Is it done? I replied. Yes, they're in custody. 10 minutes later, his car pulled up. He got out looking as drained as I felt and sat down beside me on the steps. You okay? I asked. He let out a bitter laugh. No, not really. Me neither. We sat in silence for a while, watching the street lights flicker on as it got darker. What happens now? He finally asked. They'll be arraigned tomorrow. He nodded. And the kids, their credit will have to file police reports specifically about their identities being used. Nora's going to find out, probably. The case moved quickly after that. The evidence was overwhelming. My parents tried to fight it, of course. They blamed me. They blamed Isaac. They even blamed the bank for not catching the fraud earlier. None of it worked. Both got prison time years, not months. Mom got 3 years. Dad got 5 because of his prior convictions and because he was deemed the mastermind. Isaac had to fight to clear his kids' names from the fraudulent debt. But with the case against our parents, he managed. I got my name cleared too from that old loan. Nora did leave him taking the kids back to her parents' house in Connecticut. Can't say I blame her. She's allowing supervised visits, which is more than I expected. As for me, I kept my house installed a full security system and got a dog, a German Shepherd named Rex, who would definitely discourage any unwanted visitors. I haven't spoken to my parents since their sentencing. Not sure I ever will again. Isaac and I text occasionally, mostly about practical stuff. We'll never be close, but we're civil. There's too much history, too much damage for anything more. I always thought family was supposed to mean something, that no matter what your parents would have your back. But mine never did. They didn't see me as a son. They saw me as an investment, a resource to exploit. And when I refused to be used, they tried to destroy me. I don't regret turning them in, not for a second. Because the truth is, they never even acted like my parents. Not in any way that mattered. So that's it. Not exactly a feel-good family tale, but hey, at least I still have my house and my freedom, which at the end of the day is a lot more than they could ever have.